Ever think about how the government makes sure all the things we buy, like especially stuff from other countries, are safe and meet quality standards?
Yeah, it's more complicated than you might think.
It is. Today we're looking at a Supreme Court case that really got a lot of attention.
Oh yeah, this one.
It involves steel bars, import rules, and this whole debate about how to balance making sure things are safe, but also not making trade too difficult.
It's like a classic case, I guess you could say, of competing priorities.
Yeah.
You want to keep consumers safe and make sure everything coming into the country is good.
Right.
But at the same time, you don't want so many rules that it just completely slows down trade and makes everything more expensive.
Exactly, because who wants to wait forever to get their stuff right?
Right.
Or pay way too much just because of bureaucracy and all that.
Exactly.
So tell me more about this specific case. Who are the players here, and what was the big fight about?
All right. So this case is officially called Department of Trade and Industry, and it's Bureau of Product Standards versus SteelAsia Manufacturing Corporation. Sorry. It's GR, no, 238263. And the Supreme Court decision came out on November 16th, 2020.
Got it.
SteelAsia, which is a local company that makes steel, they went to court to challenge some regulations that were put in place by the Department of Trade and Industry. We'll just call them DTI.
Okay.
And these regulations, specifically DAO number 5 and DAO number 15.11, allowed for something called conditional release of imported goods. And SteelAsia argued that this conditional release thing went against an actual law, Republic Act number 4109, which says that all imported products have to be tested and certified before they can be released from customs.
Okay, wait. Back up a second. Conditional release.
Right.
It sounds like they're letting potentially dangerous stuff into the country with, like, no control.
Yeah.
Explain that a bit more.
Yeah, that's a really common misunderstanding, and it's exactly what SteelAsia was worried about.
Right.
The DTI argued that conditional release didn't mean that these goods were just going straight into the market. It meant that they were being moved from the port to secure warehouses where they could then be tested.
Okay.
And this was done to try and deal with a couple big problems. One was just massive congestion at the ports.
I can imagine.
And then also the fact that there was only one facility in the entire country that was actually equipped to test steel bars at the time.
That makes a lot more sense. I can see how trying to test everything right there at the port would just be, like, total chaos.
Yeah, for sure.
But I imagine SteelAsia still had some issues with this whole system. What were their main arguments against it?
They actually had some good points. First, they argued that the DTI was kind of going beyond what they were allowed to do.
Like overstepping their boundaries?
Yeah, exactly. They felt that DTI was making up rules that went against what the actual law, RA 4109, intended.
Okay.
And their second argument had to do with the Equal Protection Clause.
Right.
Which basically means everyone should be treated the same way under the law.
Right.
And SteelAsia felt that this was unfair because local manufacturers like themselves had to do all the testing and certification stuff right away up front,
Right.
while importers got this special conditional release thing.
So they were basically saying, hey, why do they get special treatment?
Yeah.
It does seem kind of unfair.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So what did the lower court think about all this? Did they side with SteelAsia?
They did.
Really?
Yeah, the lower court said that the DTI's regulations were invalid
Wow.
and that they contradicted the clear requirement in RA 4109 to test everything before release.
So big win for SteelAsia.
Big win for SteelAsia.
And potentially a pretty big blow to the DTI and how they were doing the whole import process.
Potentially, yeah, big shakeup.
So this wasn't just a minor legal thing. This had potential to really change things.
It did, yeah.
So what happened next? Did the DTI just accept this defeat?
Nope, they appealed the decision.
Oh, wow.
And the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, things are getting interesting. So the Supreme Court, highest court in the land, what did they have to say? Did they agree with the lower court?
Well, this is where things took a turn. The Supreme Court actually overturned the lower court's decision.
Oh, wow.
And they sided with the DTI. They said that the regulations were valid and didn't violate RA 4109.
Okay.
But their reasoning is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
And that's what we'll get into in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, this is getting good. I'm definitely hooked. We're going to have to wait till next time to hear more about the Supreme Court's reasoning.
Definitely worth the wait.
Okay, so last time we were talking about the SteelAsia case, and it sounds like the Supreme Court had a pretty tough decision to make.
Yeah, they really had to sort through a lot of complicated legal stuff.
What were some of the key things that made them decide in favor of the DTI?
One of the first things I looked at was this idea called In Pari Materia.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. And probably for most of our listeners, too. Not all of us are lawyers here.
Right, it's Latin, so fancy, but the idea is actually pretty simple.
Okay.
Basically, it means that when you're trying to figure out what a law means, you can't just look at it by itself.
Right.
You have to think about other laws that cover similar topics.
So like looking at the whole picture, not just one piece.
Exactly, like putting a puzzle together.
Okay, makes sense.
So in this case, they looked at RA 4109 along with another law, RA 7394, which is also called the Consumer Act of the Philippines.
Got it. So they were comparing those two.
Yeah, they were trying to see how they fit together, how they work together as a whole.
And what did they find?
Well, by looking at both laws, they realized that the requirement for testing and all that, it applied to all kinds of imported goods, not just stuff that's sold to consumers directly.
Okay, so even though steel bars aren't something you'd buy in a store, they still fell under these consumer protection laws.
Exactly. And that helps support the DTI's argument that their rules were still in line with the overall goal of consumer protection.
Right, because those steel bars are going to end up in buildings and bridges and things that everyone uses.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so that's one part of it. What other reasons did the Supreme Court give?
Well, we were talking about delegated legislation before.
Right.
That played a big role, too.
Okay, remind me again what that is.
So it's the idea that when Congress passes a law, they can't spell out every single detail of how that law is going to be enforced.
Sure, there's no way they could think of every possible situation.
Exactly. So they have to give some power to agencies like the DTI to come up with the specific rules and procedures.
So like Congress provides the framework and the DPI gets to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
But it's not like the DTI can just do whatever they want.
Right, they can't just go off and make up their own laws.
No, the Supreme Court said any rules made by the DTI have to stay within the boundaries that were set by Congress.
Okay, so they can't completely go rogue. They have to stay true to the original law.
Exactly. And in this case, they found that the DTI's conditional release policy didn't go too far. It was trying to find that balance between protecting consumers and making sure that trade could still flow smoothly.
Okay, that makes sense.
They basically said conditional release, if it's done right, can achieve both of those goals.
All right, so we've got the DTI acting within its authority, trying to balance these different priorities. But what about SteelAsia's argument about equal protection?
Right. They said it was unfair that importers got this special treatment. And the Supreme Court actually addressed that directly. They said that treating different groups differently isn't always a bad thing.
Okay, I can see that, because sometimes treating everyone exactly the same could actually lead to unfairness if their situations are different.
Right. It's not about just blind equality. It's about making sure that any differences are justified.
So how did they apply that to this case?
They looked at the challenges that importers face that local manufacturers don't, things like international shipping and potential delays at ports.
Right, makes sense.
So they said it was reasonable to give importers a bit more flexibility because of those challenges.
Okay, so they weren't saying local manufacturers are less important, just acknowledging that importing is a different ballgame.
Exactly.
So this idea of equal protection, I feel like it goes way beyond just this one case. It applies to so many laws and policies.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fundamental principle, making sure that the government is treating people fairly and not just picking favorites.
Right, important stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'm also thinking about the bigger picture here. We've been talking about all this legal stuff, but what does it actually mean for regular people?
Right. How does it affect businesses, consumers, the economy as a whole? And that's what we'll get into next time.
All right, so we spent the last two parts really digging into all the legal details of this Supreme Court case.
Yeah, we went full law nerd there for a bit.
Yeah, but now I want to bring it back down to earth a little
Yeah.
and talk about what it all actually means for people.
Right. At the end of the day, these aren't just abstract concepts. Legal decisions have real-world consequences.
Right.
They affect businesses, consumers, the whole flow of products and services.
Exactly. So let's start with businesses, especially importers. How does this ruling affect them?
Well, most people see this decision as a win for importers.
Okay.
By upholding that conditional release system, the Supreme Court basically made importing stuff easier.
Right.
Less paperwork, faster turnaround times, and cheaper storage costs.
So basically it all comes down to efficiency.
Right, keeping things moving.
Not getting stuck at the port.
Yeah.
Which ultimately means businesses can save money.
Yeah, exactly.
Which hopefully translates to lower prices for consumers.
Hopefully.
So businesses are happy, consumers are happy, but what about safety?
Right.
Doesn't this system make it more likely that dangerous or low-quality products could get through?
That's a really good question, and it's something that the Supreme Court thought about very carefully.
Right.
Remember, just because something is conditionally released doesn't mean it's going straight to the shelves.
What?
It's moved to a secure warehouse where the DTI can do more thorough tests and inspections.
Right. So it's not just a free-for-all.
Exactly.
It's more like a pause where they can do those important safety checks.
Yeah, pit stop.
Yeah.
And by doing those tests in these dedicated facilities, instead of trying to do it all at the port, it actually might make those tests even more accurate and reliable.
Okay, interesting point. It's not just about speed.
Right.
It's also about having a system that's actually set up to do a good job.
Exactly.
And, like you said, the DTI can take extra steps to make sure nothing funny is going on.
Right. They can seal the shipments, put locks on the warehouses.
So it's not just about trusting the importers to do the right thing.
No.
The DTI is watching the whole time.
Yeah, multiple layers of protection there.
So ultimately, the message seems to be, we want to make importing easier,
Right.
but we're not going to compromise on safety.
Exactly. Find that balance.
So ideally, everyone wins.
Ideally, yeah.
And this decision might have some other interesting effects too, right?
Oh, for sure. Like, making the import process easier and more predictable could make the Philippines more attractive for foreign investment,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
which could then boost the economy and create more jobs.
Right, so it's not just about steel bars.
It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly.
And as technology keeps changing, we might see even more ways to make the import process both efficient and safe.
Yeah, think about something like blockchain.
Yeah.
Every product could have a digital record that shows exactly where it came from and what's been done to it.
Right. Total transparency.
Yeah, like a digital passport for each product.
Exactly.
That would be pretty amazing.
It would change everything.
So, as much as we might want to sometimes, we can't just ignore the law.
Right.
It affects us all, whether we realize it or not. And it's always changing.
It is. It has to keep up with the times.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
We've explored this case from every angle,
From top to bottom.
learned about all these important legal concepts, and most importantly, hopefully we've helped our listeners understand how it all affects them.
That's what we aim for.
So if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to hit that subscribe button.
Yes. Subscribe.
And join us next time as we continue to explore the fascinating world of law and how it shapes our lives.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening.